Hi, and welcome to the ADHD Dopamine Collective. I'm Rhonda Essling, licensed therapist, late-in-life diagnosed ADHDer, and mom, struggling to figure it out right alongside you. This is a space for women who get it, the struggles, the wins, and everything in between. Let's get into it. I was talking to someone recently, someone who's smart, capable, and very motivated. And she looked at me and she said, I don't know what's going on. I've tried everything and it feels like nothing is working. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And this really struck me. I don't want anyone to ever feel like you are doing something wrong just because you're still struggling with your ADHD. So the question of what am I doing wrong is the wrong question. The right question may be more about what is it that I need to function better. ADHD is not curable. I'm not saying this to discourage you, quite the opposite. I'm saying this because I feel like nobody's being very honest about the reality of living with neurodivergence. Aspects of your brain are wired the way that they are wired, and no amount of hacks or productivity tips or motivation or effort is going to make up for the executive functioning pieces of your brain that are just wired differently than the world that you're living in. Welcome to the ADHD Dopamine Collective. My name is Rhonda Essling, licensed therapist, elder millennial, talented and gifted kid, mama to a couple of neurospicy spitfires, just figuring it out as I go. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about the aspects of the ADHD brain that may not be changeable. I know, I'm sorry. I'm not saying this to discourage you, but rather to change perspective. Many of us have worked an entire lifetime trying to change aspects of our brain and nervous system that are unchangeable. And in doing so, we've created really toxic ways to cope. So, one of the things I've learned is to start recognizing the unchangeables, gain some radical acceptance around what we can and cannot do in order to free up space to learn about how we actually can work with our system and create a life and systems around our brain, not against it. I want to share a metaphor that came up for me in a therapy session. Oh gosh, it's been probably a year or two ago. And if you know anything about therapists or you've been in therapy or are a therapist yourself, you know we love a good metaphor. In fact, I think I might start a whole series just about metaphors that we come up with because it is one of my favorite parts of being a therapist. Anyway, so this metaphor came up. It was a client who is learning about his own ADHD, neurodivergent kids, all the things. And it's an IT guy. And when I was trying to explain this concept of radical acceptance or working with your brain and with yourself, I used the metaphor sort of on a whim of hardware and software. And it really resonated with him and it really resonated with me. And I want to share it with you today. So if you think about your phone or your computer, the hardware is the actual physical machine, right? Those are just the way things are built. That's what we're talking about when we talk about hardware. When we talk about software, you can update software, you can download different software, you can try this software and then switch to this software. It's less of a challenge to adjust, make changes, or correct things that are going on within the software of your system. So your brain, your ADHD brain, is the hardware, the way it's wired, the way certain aspects of your executive functioning are affected by ADHD. Right? So these are things like working memory, things like emotional regulation, prioritization, and the way you process sensory information. Now, these things can be impacted by lots of outside factors. They can be impacted by sleep, by hormones, by maturity. So I'm not saying these don't change over time or we can't affect these, but at the end of the day, they're largely unchangeable. They're not curable. These are all a part of how an ADHD brain works. If you go on medication, it can help with some of these things, but research by and large shows that if you stop taking the medication, you're still going to experience these aspects of executive dysfunction. So, these are likely going to be present in the way you experience your brain throughout life. That's the hardware. Software are the ways that we've learned to cope with the hardware. So when we talk software, we're talking about people pleasing, perfectionism, undercutting yourself, lack of ability to try or push yourself because you're already discounting your ability. This can be anxiety, living in crisis, creating urgency for yourself in order to trick your brain into focus, into meeting expectations. This is directly related to growing up living in a world, in a culture, in a society that wasn't built for your brain and trying to figure out how to navigate it when there was no information, tools, or resources about how to actually do that in a healthy way. So this is what I see in my office time and time again. It's us spending a lifetime trying to change the hardware in our system and disregarding the software, the parts of us that have learned to try to navigate this world in a different way, whether it's shame, whether it's beliefs about us being lazy, the inner critic, the negative self-talk, when in reality, those inner critics, negative self-talk, shame, anxiety, the pieces of how we try to navigate the world or change our hardware are actually the ones that make life harder for us. And those are the things we end up working on in my therapy office, not changing your brain. So I'll share a little story. Before I was diagnosed just a few years ago, I myself was an overachiever, people pleaser. I was trying to navigate the world as though I had someone else's brain and nervous system. And as a result, I experienced incredibly painful, debilitating bouts of burnout, anxiety to the point of having panic attacks, all kinds of really harmful ways that I learned to show up in a way that would hide things I felt ashamed of. Those beliefs that I was lazy or I wasn't enough or I was too much, all kinds of things. I formed my life around the rules that I thought I needed to follow. How to be a good therapist, how to be a good mom, how to be a good wife, how to be a good friend. And at all of this, I didn't take into consideration what I needed. All I took into consideration is how I needed to show up in the world. I tried everything. I had planners, I had schedules, I had routines. I can't even tell you how many productivity binders I tried to create, a new system that was going to change my entire life and keep track of everything for me, and nothing worked. As I'm sure you know, nothing is going to change those hardwired things. But what I didn't realize was that the software I was running was actually making the whole system operate much less efficiently. In fact, it was like everything was so much harder because of this fear of shame, of disappointment, of someone seeing that I was struggling or I wasn't good enough. So when I got my diagnosis and I started learning about how my brain actually worked, I started learning about how my kids' systems actually worked, and also learning how to guide my kids through a world that wasn't built for their brains and showing up differently for them, I started to realize what a disservice I had done for myself for so long. I didn't want to pass those harmful coping tools onto my kids. I didn't want them to have debilitating anxiety and feel like they were never good enough and that they constantly had to thrive. Otherwise, something was wrong with them. And so, in doing this unlearning, I also started to reflect on what about myself was I doing that was hardware and was software. And so I started thinking about instead, what does my system need to operate better? I needed this. I needed this shift to actually be the mom I wanted to be and be the therapist I wanted to be and be the wife I wanted to be, which was one that was happier and could show up as herself. That shift changed everything. Okay, so what does this mean in real life? Let's break it down. Dopamine seeking behavior. That's hardware. How we learn to shame ourselves, cope, and suppress that, that's software. So we need a certain level of consistent dopamine for an ADHD brain. Our brains process dopamine less effectively. And so it may be there, but we're not actually processing it in a way that it's getting to where it needs to go. So, in order to offset this, we need a steadier stream of dopamine. Unfortunately, we experience this as like dopamine deficiency. And then there's this urgency around getting a quick fix, right? And in reality, big influxes of dopamine do us no good because it's in and it's out, right? What we actually need are more sustained levels of dopamine throughout our day. And that may mean building a life and an experience for yourself that is dopamine rich, right? Where you're wearing the things that make you happy and you're eating the things that you love and you are leaning into hobbies and you are letting go of things that no longer serve you, no matter how much time or energy or money you have invested in it. And you are allowing yourself to lean into some of those things throughout your day and experience that actually give you what you need to have a steadier stream of dopamine. So, what's the software related to this? The shame, the self-judgment, this idea that you should just be able to force yourself to sit down and do the hard and boring things. That is the software. That doesn't give you any room to think about how to actually get yourself to do all of the responsibilities and obligations that you feel like you need to do in a better way. It honestly can be more debilitating than it can be helpful. Sensory sensitivity. This is something that is also hardware. We experience sensory input in various ways depending on how our sensory system is framed. So, women especially, there's research out there that shows that women and girls with ADHD experience sensory processing concerns, especially tactile and auditory, so touch and sound, at a higher rate than men and boys do. This is also part of the reason why it's hard navigating this as a woman when all of the research has been on young boys. But this is a reality for many, many women where they're just more sensitive to sensory stimulation, where it's either overstimulation or understimulation, right? It can go both ways and it can be variable. So this one can be hard to navigate too, but this is hardware. When we talk about software, we talk about the ways that we feel like we're not enough or something's wrong with us, right? So a good example of this is when I was a new mama and I had my colicky, little overstimulated, neurodivergent baby. The constant touch, the breastfeeding, the crying, the inconsolability, the demands on my nervous system constantly. Those were some of the hardest days of my life. And I felt so much shame and guilt around that because I wasn't showing up for my child in the way they needed. Every time they cried and I knew I needed to pick them up and cuddle them, I would like cringe because it was a constant state of feeling touched out, overstimulated, overwhelmed. Everything felt impossible for me during that time. And I felt alone in it. I had learned throughout time to talk to myself in ways that were like, you should just push through. You can do this. If you care, you will just make it happen. The reality is, my experience was real. Those sensory concerns were like torture for me. And then on top of it, I would shame myself around, why isn't it you can't just do this? Nobody else has a hard time with this. This is supposed to be like the happiest part of being a mom. And you're supposed to just connect with this beautiful little baby. And I love that kid to death. But that was not my experience of that time. In fact, it was exacerbated by the negative self-talk, the inner critic, and the shame that I put on myself because I was struggling. Hardware, hyperfocus. This is a hardware issue. And I call it an issue. Many people think it's a superpower, but the reality is we can hyperfocus and forget anything else exists. We can forget to take care of our own personal needs until it's an emergency situation. The software piece of hyperfocus is the negative self-talk, criticism around, why did you snap at your kid when they interrupted you? Why didn't you eat anything today? Why didn't you work out or do the other things on your list that you wanted to do today? We had a whole list of things to do and you got stuck on this one thing. Why is that? This can also include the guilt around what you didn't do because you were in hyperfocus. Or it can lead to these thoughts of like not wanting to medicate our ADHD because we don't want to lose the ability to hyperfocus, which is an aspect a lot of people consider a superpower. The burnout cycle. The hardware piece of this is the variable energy, the high energy days, the low energy days, the capacity within our executive functioning can fluctuate a great deal over time. The software of this is, well, you have done it before. Why is it a problem now? This feeling that you need to be on all the time, that you should be able to push through and sustain a certain level of functioning, of operating day to day, no matter what. And that just doesn't work for us because our energy level and our functioning is super variable, especially for women who also have the added component of hormonal fluctuations throughout the month, which directly impact our ADHD symptoms. And masking. Masking is the biggest software issue there is, one that often we've been doing our entire lives. We weren't born masking. We learned it. We learned it at a very young age, and it was reinforced throughout our entire lives, either directly or indirectly. People telling us that the way that we function wasn't going to work in the world. And so we started building a version of ourselves that felt like it was going to work for other people. It was going to work for the expectations of the world that we lived in, whether it be school, work, friendships, marriages, relationships. And we leaned into those versions of ourselves 100%. And in the process, lost a lot of what made us authentically ourselves. So we need more consistent dopamine over time, right? This means building a whole life around passion, interest, novelty, competition, and urgency, not huge, big floods of it, which is what anxiety does for us, but a more kind of consistent through time. And we can do that for ourselves. This also requires us to reduce the role of masking in our life. It is such a pull, a drag on our resources, on our nervous system. So the more that we can find safe spaces or build those safe spaces where masking is not required, where we can show up more authentically as ourselves, that's going to create more space for us to live authentically and create this interest-based life that better supports our nervous system. This also includes building neurodivergent friendly spaces, both at home, socially, and at work, where you can work with the urgency and hyperfocus instead of trying to change it and work against it. I did a story yesterday about how one of my hacks, I know we're talking about that, but one of the tricks that I use is I allow myself to hyperfocus at work. I just make sure I set a timer or have a time that at this time, no matter where I'm at in the project, I will stop and give myself a dopamine rich break. So, yesterday, this looked a lot like I'm going to stop no matter where I'm at, which I was problem solving some tech issues with automations in my workflow. And I was not in a stopping place, but the timer went off. I stopped. I went to a local coffee shop to get some lunch, walked away, took my break. And when I came back, I remembered that there were other tasks on my list that I needed to get done. And I had gotten this hyper focus project to a point of being able to put it on the to-do list for tomorrow, the next day, the rest of the week, and move on to the other things that were more time sensitive. The time sensitive pieces of this project were done. I could not have gained that insight if I didn't take that break, because I would have just continued to hyper focus on the task at hand, even though I could pivot. So, this is what I mean when I say making these kinds of small changes can have a big impact, right? 2 years ago, I would have just pushed through, spent the entire day down a total rabbit hole trying to problem solve how to do this thing. And instead, I was able to stop. I ate some lunch, got some caffeine, and hit a reset button for the afternoon where I could pivot to other more time sensitive tasks. That's something my brain doesn't naturally do very well. You're not trying to be a totally different person. You're just trying to set up systems that actually work for you and support the way your brain naturally functions. Just like I did yesterday, knowing I could use my hyper focus to get a lot done on one project, but I need to set limits. I need to have a container around it. Learning what works for you, again, game changer when it comes to how you can function day to day. So, why does it matter to understand the software and the hardware? Why is this metaphor helpful? Well, it's because where we focus and having this knowledge about the changeables and the unchangeables shifts the conversation. It shifts where our energy goes, and it shifts what we actually focus on healing, changing, navigating differently in a way that is helpful. This ability to stop focusing solely on changing the unchangeables actually frees up a lot of space to learn to do things differently. So instead of asking the question, why can't you do this? You can ask the question, what is it that my system needs for me to be doing differently? So this piece is really important, and I want you to really hear it. And that is that the software can be updated. It can be updated constantly. The beliefs about yourself, that you're broken, that you're not enough, that you're too much, software that can be updated. The coping strategies that are no longer serving you and actually may be harmful, that can be updated. These are all things that we can work with and continue to update over time so that we have some relief from the ways that we've learned to navigate the world. Your hardware is not the problem. It never was. The problem is the way that you learned to cope with it, hide it, mask it, and navigate a world that wasn't built for you. So, what does this look like in my therapy office? Well, this looks like oftentimes clients coming in and telling me that the problem is something that I know is hardware. When in reality, what I'm hearing is a lot of pressure, a lot of negative self talk, a lot of beating up on themselves about what they are or are not doing. oftentimes the conversation shifts really quickly into, well, if that wasn't the focus, or if it was okay that today was a low energy day, what could you do differently? This can be really challenging because it's challenging a lifetime worth of knowledge, of expectations, and assumptions that we carry along the way. When I say this, I want to be clear. Our parts may not be ready to hear this. Those parts of us that have developed to protect us, to manage our systems, to force ourselves into states of being so that we're not rejected, so that we can have a job, so we're not alone. You know, they're doing these things for really important reasons. And so I just want to put that out there too. This isn't about kicking those coping tools to the side because they're not going to be ready yet. It's more about giving yourself a little more grace so you have some space to really think about how you could do this in a different way. So, how is it that I know that they're talking hardware? Well, it'll often come in with, if I could just figure out how to manage my home, if I could just figure out how to not yell at my kids, and if I could be more present and stop scrolling on my phone all the time. They're looking to change hardware things without realizing that the software is making it even harder for them to do that. So this shift in thinking, this reframing how an ADHD system functions to a hardware and software one, it doesn't make the things that are hard go away. It just gives us a different frame of reference when we talk about how it is we need to move forward to solve problems, to develop ways to actually heal and cope with some of these things. What it does is it takes the shame out of the equation. And one of the things that I can share wholeheartedly as a therapist and as someone who has struggled with these things personally is that shame has never helped anyone change their behavior. Shame doesn't help with healing, and it actually makes it much, much harder for us to get to the underlying issues at hand. Okay, so starting to update your software. Let's talk about it. There is not going to be a quick fix, 9 steps to changing your life here. I know this comes as a shock to you, I'm sure, because you've never heard that before. But the reality is this is a slow process. There is a reason why the hacks and the easy quick fixes, the planners, the productivity systems haven't worked for you. And it's because there is no Band-Aid. There is no quick fix that's going to make this better. But there are ways to start moving forward in a way that is wholly focused on updating your software instead of trying to change your hardware. And unfortunately, this is going to be the most therapist thing you've probably ever heard. It's going to start by noticing. I know, I say it all the time and I can roll my eyes at myself, but it's true. Noticing when you're dysregulated, noticing when you're getting upset, noticing when you're starting to beat up on yourself or having that like inner critic conversations going on. Are you trying to change the hardware? Is this software that's coming up and shaming you around the hardware? And being gentle with yourself in those moments, right? Being able to get curious is always going to be an in to a different kind of conversation, right? So noticing something about this feels really familiar. Like I've done this before many times. And what if I thought about this differently? What if it's okay if I don't get everything crossed off my list today? What if it's okay if today is a low energy day? What would that be like? What if instead of beating up on myself because I snapped at a kid who interrupted my hyper focus, I take a step back and I think about what was lighting up my hyper focus in the first place? What about that project really made my system go all in, right? Being curious instead of what's not working, being curious about what is. Being curious about the coping that comes up when things aren't going well. Also, question the shoulds. If you are beating up on yourself, like I should have done this, I should have done that. I know therapists think too, shoulding on yourself, shoulding, let me be very clear, is one of the least helpful things we can do, but it's also a really big indication that this is someone else's expectation, whether it be culturally, society, maybe it's something you heard growing up, or from someone else that told you that that should be the expectation. So getting curious about that and trying to zoom out a little bit. Treating this, navigating your brain in a different way as an experiment is always going to set the stage for you to be able to try things that don't go well and that do go well and learn something and pivot and be curious, which is so naturally how our brains work. So I love to not only experience all of this, like what gives me dopamine, what helps me through the day, what doesn't work, what sets me back and engages my masking as a big experiment. I'll even name it to clients, to others. It doesn't always go well for me. And that's okay. When it's an experiment, those are the moments we actually learn more than when it does go well. And also, updating software happens when you find your people who get it, people who experience the world in a different way and are not going to meet you with conformist ideas about how you need to show up in the world. That is why finding a community of people who get it is so important. It reframes every aspect of this, and they are able to, in real time, challenge the shoulds, challenge the shame, and the unrealistic expectations that you may be carrying about yourself. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. And that is a knowledge that your brain is not broken, that it's wired in a certain way, and that is hardware. And permission for you to lean into that hardware, even if it's inconvenient for others, even if it means challenging your ideas of how you should be showing up in the world. I want this conversation to give you permission to step away from trying to change the unchangeables, from trying to force yourself into a mold that wasn't created for you and systems that just are not going to work for you, and lean into the aspects of yourself that you actually really like. Learn, experiment with how to live more authentically in the world and what it is during your day that actually helps your system, whether it's a steady stream of dopamine, whether it's ways that you can manage the sensory environments that you are in, or give yourself permission to take a break if it's getting to be too much. I recently did a podcast with Chandran Lapel, and we talked about youth sports and the permission giving around not showing up sometimes. So I hope you hear this as a way to think about and explore things differently. If I choose not to show up to a volleyball tournament day because it is probably one of the most sensory overstimulating environments I have ever been in my life, and that's saying a lot because I'm a Disney adult, but a part of me will carry some shame around not showing up for my kid. On the flip side, I know if I don't go to that overstimulating environment, that's probably going to take me out for a couple of days. I'm going to be able to be a more regulated and present version of myself with those same kids during that time. It's all a trade-off. And so giving yourself permission to take care of yourself first and really listen to what your system needs actually can help you be that version of yourself that you're trying so hard to be already. So if this episode resonated with you, I want to hear about it. make sure you're signed up for the mailing list. I really want to hear from you, and you can always respond to emails I send. You can comment down below. Follow along if this also feels impactful or feels like it's landing for you in a way that's helpful. And if you could, go ahead and review the show so that others can find me as well and have access to this information that I don't think is talked about enough. So on that, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If this episode hit home for you, share it with someone else who may need to hear it. And come find the rest of the conversation. All of my links are in my Linktree / Rhonda Essling ADHD coach. I'll see you next time.